Elspeth here from Vegan News Daily, and today I'm going to show you how I make my Super Bowl cake. It's a sweet potato brownie that I shape into a shape of a football, and then I decorate it with some cashew cream. Let me show you exactly how I do it. So first I have my oven turned on to 350 degrees, and I have all my equipment and all my ingredients out here. In a food processor bowl with the S blade inserted, I'm going to add some dates that I have soaked for about 20 minutes. These are medjool dates. I've soaked them in some boiling water. Just always make sure to pit the dates, pop them out. And I use about 12 dates, so I've got about 12 pits in there, and I'll pop them in here. This recipe doesn't use any processed sugar, so if you're not used to having recipes without real sugar, you might want to add a few more dates. That's just a taste preference. I have gotten quite used to eating things this way, and these are very sweet for me. So I'm just going to go ahead and add these 2 dates because they are sitting out here. So these ones weren't soaked, but the rest were soaked in the water, and I add all the soaking water as well to that. I'm also going to add about 3/4 of a cup of this raw cacao. You could definitely use some cacao powder, which is a whole lot sweeter than cacao powder. So definitely consider using cacao powder as well, because it'll give a nice sweetness. It's still going to give you that lovely chocolatey brown color, and it's not going to give you any kind of buzz. No caffeine in cacao powder. So that's it. And then we need to add sweet potato. So these are just regular sweet potatoes that I had, placed on a baking sheet and just roasted in the oven for about 45 minutes. And all I'm going to do is pop the sweet potato out of their skin. And these sweet potatoes are going to be the element that give the brownies a really nice, thick, fudgy sort of consistency. So I just pop the sweet potato out of its skin. It really doesn't matter if some of the skin gets into the brownie mixture, but take off most of the skin. I am going to be processing it in the food processor, so it will get incorporated if some does. So approximately 1.5 cups. So I do have a measure here, so I'll just sort of estimate there, and I think I do need a little bit more. So I'm not going to use all of this, but I'll use some of this. My dog Prince absolutely loves sweet potato. He's lying here right beside me, and he's really looking forward to having these sweet potato skins. So I'll be sure to give him those. So I'm going to also add some almond milk. You could use any kind of plant-based unsweetened milk. So oat milk would be great, hemp milk, whatever you choose. And I'm just going to process this for a moment or two. Going to stop the processor, and then I have this great spatula that comes with the food processor. And if any of you are wondering, this is a Breville I think it's 12-cup processor, and I love the spatula that comes with this. So this is wonderful and fudgy looking. Give it another whirl. So the only other ingredients in here are the dry ingredients. For this I'm going to use some oatmeal flour, so oat flour. You could use oat flour that's already ground, but this is just regular old-fashioned oatmeal that I'm going to grind up into flour. So I just have a small blender here that I'm just going to blend this all up into flour and add this to the brownie mixture. So I've ground up my oat flour. For this Super Bowl cake, I don't really want to see too many flecks of the oatmeal in the brownie, so I ground it fairly fine. If you weren't making it into a Super Bowl cake, it wouldn't really matter if you had some chunks of the oatmeal, but for this purpose, I'm going to keep it fairly well ground. And then I'm going to add some baking powder and baking soda. If I can open the bag. Here we go. Baking powder and baking soda. These are going to be the agents that give it a little bit of rise. And I will just stir it in before I start to process this because I don't want to be covered in a puff of oatmeal flour. So I just want to get this incorporated a little bit before I start processing it. And then that's it. I'm going to turn this out into a baking dish and get them in the oven. Pretty good. Just make sure I'm happy with that. I don't want any white flecks in here, so yeah, that looks pretty good. All right, so I'm going to get this into the oven. So I'm using a silicone 8x8 loaf pan here, a baking pan here. You could use a different shape if you wanted, but in order to get the football shape, this I find is the best. If you wanted to make a little extra of this, like make 1.5 of the recipes for a bigger crowd, you could put this into a rectangular baking dish, and that way you could get a bigger football. But this works well for the size of my family. So I have to admit that I'm really not much of a football fan. And I do watch the Super Bowl, and I am all right admitting that I'm pretty much watching for the halftime show and for the commercials. That's the part that I love. But I feel like I should at least watch the game once a year, so that's what I do. I watch the Super Bowl, and it's just kind of a fun American tradition to all come together and cheer on the players and watch this crazy thing we call football, which really doesn't involve a whole lot of foot movement besides running. I didn't grow up in this country. I grew up in Africa, in Zimbabwe, and what I knew as football was what you call soccer in the United States of America. So football to me was using your feet, but I was educated once I moved to this country on what real football is. I grew up with rugby, which is a little different to football, but kind of a lot of the same macho sportsmanship and camaraderie that goes with it. So I'm just going to scoop this into here. I'm going to get every last bit of brownie off into this, and because I'm going to be cutting a football out of this, I want to make sure that it's nice and smooth on the top. I mean, it doesn't have to be super smooth, but as smooth as I can get it. So, and that is how it looks. It's very fudgy. It's not going to go anywhere. It's stuck in this pan. So then I just take my spatula. You could do this with a knife, and you don't have to do this at all. You can do this completely after the fact. But I just find it really helps a little bit for me to start shaping the football. So I just kind of bring a little scoop around like that, just sort of marking out where my football cutout is going to be, and just try and mimic it on the other side so you have this sort of shape. And again, once I've baked it and pop it out of here, I'm going to be able to really get my good football shape. So I'm going to pop this into the oven, get this baking. So I've set my timer. We'll come back and check on it, and I'll show you what's next in decorating. So while the brownie is baking in the oven, we can do a couple of things to get ready for decorating it and making this a really fun, festive Super Bowl cake. So one is prepare your field or board. So all I've done is I've gotten a couple of chopping boards. I did two because when I first made this brownie cake, I used my larger chopping board, but I realized with this size brownie pan, with an 8 by 8 brownie pan, this field was a little bit too big. So I went with a smaller rectangular board. So just take any kind of chopping board, or you could, just use a cake board if you have a cake board. And I just covered it in some green tissue paper. So this is just the tissue paper that you use for wrapping. And then for the lines, I used just some white ribbon. And I just, cut lengths of white ribbon, and you can see the underside. It's really quite rough here. So this is just green tissue paper. I Scotch taped down the white ribbon. And for those of you who are not familiar with the lines, there's the 50-yard line, which is right in the middle. I learned this as I was making this board. I know I've heard these terms over and over every time I've watched football, but it never really sunk in. So now I know where the 40-yard line is, and the 30-yard line, and the 20-yard line, and the 10-yard line. So you can just take a white marker or a little paint, if you're really careful with paint, and just mark down the lines on the field. And then I just covered it with some plastic wrap. So this would just make sure that the cake was not going to sort of soak into the tissue paper that's on the board. So I have my board ready, so I can set that aside. So all you arts and crafts people can enjoy making something like this. So the other part that we need to focus on is making the laces on the football. So for that, I mean, you could use some coconut cream if you want to whip up some coconut cream into a vegan whipped cream. That would be great. Or you could use cashews. So these are just some raw cashews. I prefer to use the cashews. Nuts are very good for you in small amounts, and I feel like this is a better option. I also have some water here, so I have about 1/3 of a cup of the cashews. I'm just going to add half of this water here and a little drop of vanilla. So you could add a touch of date syrup or maple syrup or something like that to make this sweet, but it really is just for decoration, and I feel like the vanilla actually gives it a nice sweetness. So in that same blender that I ground up my oat flour, I'm just going to grind up this the cashews. You could do this in a Vitamix too, like in the very small, if you have one of the adapters that has the small cups, because it really is just a small amount that you need to make for this, because it's just, it's just for the decoration for the laces. So it comes out fairly liquidy to start with. So what I do is I just place this whole container into the refrigerator, and I let it sit there for about an hour or so, so it gets nice and cold. And what you end up with is a nice sort of thicker consistency of the cashew cream. It's very white, and this is going to make a nice, thing to decorate. And the other thing that you need is a piping bag. So you can buy some plastic piping bags, or there are some silicone piping bags that you can reuse. I do have a video up on my YouTube of how I make a piping bag out of parchment paper, and that's what I'm going to use here today. So once our cake comes out of the oven, I'll show you exactly how I'm going to cut out the brownie into a football, and we're going to get decorated. So the alarm's been going off on the brownie, so I'm going to get that out of the oven, show you how that looks. Wow, my house smells really good. Smells of chocolate. So here it is. I'm just going to set that aside for a moment because it's quite hot. So ideally you'd want to just let that cool completely before you start to tackle it. You could even just put this whole thing, once it's cool, put this whole thing in the refrigerator, and then on the day of the Super Bowl or the day of your football party, you can take it out and decorate it. So this is the kind of calligraphy paint pen that I use to do the field, the marks on the board for whatever the line, the lines are. And what I was just going to say is, like, right now when I'm filming this, I don't know who the Super Bowl teams are this year, but this is the end zone. These are the end zone. You can decorate this, in the colors of the football teams, or put the football logos on the end zones as well, and that could be really fun. For now, I'm just gonna leave it blank, but hopefully your team will be in the football, will be in the Super Bowl this year, and you'll be able to come up with some, fun decorations for the end zones. So let's see how we do here. I'm gonna go ahead and let this cool off completely, and then we will come back and decorate it once it's cold. So I'm now going to get the brownie out of the refrigerator, and I do want to mention that this brownie recipe is very dense and fudgy, but it tastes so much better once it's been refrigerated. It tastes okay when it's room temperature if it's warm, but a cold fudgy brownie is probably going to give you the most flavor out of this particular recipe. So let me grab that. Here it is, and as I said, it's quite dense and fudgy, so as you can see, I can pop it right out of the pan like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it with a knife and just try and get sort of close to the best football shape that I can. And again, I had made those sort of markations before I baked it, and that does help me a little bit get the shape that I want. So, never mind, I'm going to pop this brownie out of here, whoops, and try and get the pieces to fall away from the brownie. So I've got that side there, and this side here, and that looks pretty good actually. That's a pretty good football shape right there. And this brownie has not cooled completely, so we're just going to work quickly here. So all I need to do now is get those sort of football laces on, and the little laces on the end here. So with my piping bag, I'm going to just cut the little tip off. And again, if you have like a silicone piping bag, that would be great. But I do have a little way of making these piping bags on my on the YouTube channel, on Vegan News Daily YouTube channel. If you look for parchment paper piping bags, you'll see a little video on how I make these. And I've got to grab my cashew cream from my refrigerator, and then we'll get working. Here you go. Okay, so this is nice and cold now, and it's a little bit thicker. And I'm going to transfer it into this piping bag. And again, it's quite liquidy, so I don't want to have it all running out of the bag. So I can add that in here. So what I do is I start with the center, and I'm just going to do like a little short laces. So I want to do about 3 horizontals here. And I'm going to do a little curved line at the end. And if you mess up, you can just take a little, a sharp knife and scrape it all off and start again. Don't worry about it. But what you end up with is a really fun Super Bowl cake. That could be just a fun dessert. It's healthy, it's whole food, plant-based, sugar, oil, salt-free, and this would make a fabulous dessert for your Super Bowl party or for any football party. And don't forget, if you want any more of our recipes, to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just hit the red button below, and if you want to get notifications, hit that little bell, and every time we put up a new video, you will get notified of it. And if you want the recipe, send us an email to vegannewsdaily@gmail.com.